Okay, it seems times now shows 2:35 p.m. Shall we start? I think more people would come in, join in. Oh, sorry. Uh, oh, sorry. I didn't actually switch on my video. So it's 2:35 now. Shall we start, Prof?
Yep.
Yes, good. Okay, thank you. You look tired. Hopefully you you would actually bear with this session for 2 hours with us today. Thank you so much. Alhamdulillah, it shows that we have around 100 plus in our GM, and also on live stream we have a few people. I think there would be more to join in because those who are teachers at school just came back from school, right? It's
Right.
2:30 p.m. They just came back, so they need some time. Perhaps, hopefully, some people would join later. Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam Malaysia Madani. Our distinguished speaker, Professor Dr. David Evans.
Hello Tuan Rosmani ni, mic Puan tak buka.
Oh, so sorry. So I was speaking alone. Thank you so much. Who's actually notify me? Oh my goodness. Thank you for the notification. Again, my apologies. I will start again. Okay, Assalamualaikum. Oh, because I have actually turned on the mic, it automatically turn off. So could all of you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yes,
Thank
now.
you. Alhamdulillah.
Yes,
Sebab tadi dah buka, dia mati sendiri. Okay, again, my apology. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam Malaysia Madani. Our distinguished speaker, Professor Dr. David Evans, our Deputy Director for Special Education Sector, Curriculum Development Division, Ministry of Education, and Cik Muhammad Shafi'i bin Abdul Ghani, who are able to join us today. Doctors, ladies and gentlemen, again, a very good afternoon to everyone and welcome to our PLC session, Professional Learning Community in Education, with the topic Inclusive Pedagogies, Designing and Implementing Inclusive Education. So our event for today will surely give us a lot of learning about pedagogies to support all students regardless of differences. So please sit down, relax, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon, or may I say our last afternoon tea or coffee, because tomorrow we are celebrating our Ramadan, the holy month for Muslims, tomorrow. So before we begin, I would actually say that throughout this session, I would use the term students because I think there are others from MOE, from MOSE and so on. So I use the word students instead of pupils. Okay, is that all right? Okay, it's because I know that my colleague would say that why do you students not pupils instead of pupils? I use students. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, it is my delight to be your moderator for today's session. My name is Rosmali binti Saleh from Special Education Sector, Curriculum Development Division. Again, I would like to extend my warm welcome to all of you. We appreciate your taking time off your busy schedule to join us today. So may we invite Encik Muhammad Shazwan Bijwani to lead our prayers. Please, Encik Shazwan.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lily. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise is for Allah, Lord of all worlds, our sustainer, our guide, ever present, never unaware, infinitely able, your servants in your loving care, guide us to pure convictions, then inspiring us the courage to match those convictions. Allahumma ya Rahman ya Rahim. We pray for peace, not war, love, not hate, generosity, not greed, unity, not division, and we commit ourselves to not betraying our prayers with actions that contradict them. O Allah, we ask you for the goodness of this day, and of the days that come after it, and we seek refuge in you from the evil of this day and of the days that come after it. O Allah, in conjunction with the inclusive Pedagogies PLC today, we ask you to facilitate our affairs and bless them for us. Provide us with guidance in all matters. Grant us wisdom, beneficial knowledge, goodly provision, and acceptable deeds. Allahumma ya Hayyu ya Qayyum, ya Zal Jalali wal Ikram. O ever living one, O eternal one, by your mercy we call on you to set right all of our affairs. Guide us with those whom you have guided, and strengthen us with those whom you have given strength. Take us to your care with those whom you have taken to your care. Allahumma ja'al jam'ana hadha jam'a marhuma wa tafarruqana min ba'di tafarruqa ma'suma. O Allah, make this gathering of ours a blessed gathering, and our parting hereafter a blessed and protected parting. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Amin, amin ya rabbal alamin. Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Encik Sazwan. Thank you for leading our prayers for today. Okay, to start our program, we are pleased to welcome our Deputy Director for Special Education Sector, Encik Muhammad Shafi'i, to deliver the opening remarks. Please welcome Encik Shafi'i.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Encik Shafi'i, will you please turn on your video?
Turn on already.
Turn on already. Can you see?
Yes, okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat datang. Alhamdulillah pada petang ini kita dapat berkumpul melalui talian inilah untuk menimba ilmu daripada Profesor David Evan dan saya mengucapkan kerana dapat meluangkan masa walaupun kita sibuk pada petang ini ya. Jadi izinkan saya untuk membacakan ataupun memberi ucapan dalam bahasa Inggeris ya. Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan good afternoon to all participants of the professional learning community today, or we call PLC, with the topics inclusive pedagogies, designing and implementing inclusive pedagogies. It's certainly a great pleasure for me to deliver the opening remark and to officiate the event. First and foremost, we are delighted to announce that this a very special program in enriching our understanding of inclusive pedagogies. In so doing, today we have a special guest and distinguished speaker invite from miles away, Australia, to the event. On behalf of the Curriculum Development Division, I would like to welcome Professor Dr. David Evan from the Faculty of Art and Social Science, University of Sydney. Professor David Evan from the is no stranger to us. Be familiar with Professor. He was one of our speakers at the curriculum conference last year. I would like to personally offer my warm welcome to Professor who has taken his valuable time to join and share with us in this session. Ladies and gentlemen, a clear understanding about inclusive pedagogies is vital for all educators. In brief, inclusive pedagogies are practices that create equitable and social just learning environment, ensuring that all learners have an equal opportunity to demonstrate the achievement of learning outcomes. These practices are based on ways of thinking about education that consider individual, curricular, and social factors that impact people's ability to learn effectively. Inclusive pedagogy encompasses a range of strategies, some of which focus especially on the need of culturally diverse learners and others that apply more broadly. Supporting people's voice and agency is an important way of ensuring that device learners are empowered rather than marginalized in learning space. These strategies ultimately benefit all learners, as all pupils carry a range of knowledge and diversity into the classroom and express this in their learning. So let us pay attention the discourse and enlighten ourselves with the topic. I am sure Professor David Evan has a lot to share with us today. Finally, we would like to offer our appreciate to organizing committee uh, for
Encik Shafi'i, I think your mic is actually switched off just now.
automatic.
Yes, that's why.
It's,
It's the same issue with me just now.
Allah. Sorry for
It's
that
okay, it's okay. Let's proceed.
inconvenience.
Uh-uh.
So let us pay attention to the discourse and enlighten ourselves with the topic. I'm sure Professor Dr. David Evan has lots to share with us today. Finally, we would like to offer our appreciation to the organizing community, Major Dr. Rosmali Saleh and teams, and to all of you who have made yourself available to be part of the participants of this event. Thank you, everyone. You have contributed to making this PLC session a success. Please do enjoy the session. Take care. Ramadan Kareem. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Encik Shafi'i, for the opening message and stimulating speech. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes. Today's session is recorded to be available for future references. If you have any questions for the speaker, please use the link that will be shared soon in the chat features. We will hold the questions until the end of the session. I will then read the question for our speaker to answer as time permits. But don't worry, if you think that you want to voice out and show yourself, just raise your hand so that we can actually notice and call you upon it. Okay, we will also share the link for a short survey on this session and the SPLKPN link, especially for those under MOE at the end of the session. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's now time to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Dr. David Evans. We are privileged to have with us today Professor Dr. David Evans. Dr. David is a professor for special and inclusive education in the Sydney School of Education and Social Work, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at the University of Sydney, Australia. So he is actively engaged with teaching at the pre-service and postgraduate level, supporting teachers to build their professional knowledge and skills in designing and implementing educational programs that are inclusive of learners from a full range of backgrounds. So his research examines teachers' attitudes and self-efficacy towards educating students with disability. Projects are conducted within Australia and internationally, example, Indonesia, mainland China, Saudi Arabia, and our own country, Malaysia. Professor Dr. David Evans is also a visiting professor for our very own University Pendidikan Sultan Idris.
Dr. Lily, unmute.
Again, so I should be aware of my mic as well because it's automatically switching off without me doing it. I'm so sorry, my apology. So ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me? Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Inclusive
Yes.
pedagogy is a subject that we should all deeply interested as educators, whether we are at schools, here at universities, polytechnic college, even at the Ministry of Education, to be effective teachers to all students in supporting them. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Dr. David Evans. Prof, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lily, and welcome to everyone. Before we start, though, I'm having trouble sharing screen, Dr. Lily.
Yeah. So you can we just share that screen with you, and then you have to hint us for the next slide and next slide. Okay. Okay, is that all right?
Okay, all right. Yeah, you might have to
Okay,
operate.
so we are going to share that screen for you. Thank you. Hold on, yeah. Okay. Please be patient. My colleagues over here are trying to actually share the slides.
Okay.
Yeah. It's actually a practice for us, especially for Muslim. Bersabar,
Okay.
patience. Yeah. Okay. 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 Good.
All right. So thank you very much, Dr. Lily, and in particular, thank you to the member of your division who welcomed me. It is great to be back talking with people in Malaysia, and I hope that we can have a productive conversation over the next hour and probably 15 minutes. I will be asking you some questions, so I'm hoping that people will answer some questions. It's going to be a little different because I was hoping to type into my presentation some of these comments, but that's all right. Next. So as is very traditional here in Australia, in 2023, I would like to acknowledge the tradition of custodianship and law of the country on which the University of Sydney campuses stand. Pay my respects to those who have cared and continue to care for country. I would like to pay specific recognition to the Dharawal people on the land of whom I am presenting to you today. Thanks. Next. So my aim today, and can I say to you, this is something that I believe in a quality, inclusive educational environment, we need to have clear, flexible aims of what we're trying to achieve. So what I'm trying to achieve today is to explore the concept of inclusive education and how the idea of inclusive pedagogies fits within that. I want to outline some core constructs of inclusive schools and then discuss and critically examine pedagogies in relation to how they uphold the principles of inclusive education. And a key message I would like you to take away today is that there is no magic answer for this. I am not going to give you a book. I am not going to give you a package. I'm not going to give you a video that says this is inclusive. And I would like to, first of all, have a comment or get people to maybe indicate on the next slide which of these are inclusive or would you consider to be inclusive pedagogies. All right, next. All right, you might need to touch a couple of times. One time. Next. Yep, another. 3, next. 4, next, and next. Okay, and good afternoon to those people who are just joining us. So I would like you to, if you want, in the chat, maybe put down a couple of numbers. Do you think which of those do you think are inclusive or could be judged as an inclusive pedagogy? Just the numbers.
Oh,
We're going to be shy. You told me that, Dr. Lily. Okay, all right.
yes,
Unit
all.
1577. Yep. Great. Maybe it's the delay and messages getting to me here in New South Wales. All of the above. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So one of my comments to you is that I believe all of them in some ways could be an inclusive pedagogy, although I wouldn't be probably saying that they necessarily are all pedagogies. For example, Universal Design for Learning is a framework. It's not a pedagogy. So that would be one that I would rule out. But it is going to be something that helps us establish what might be an inclusive pedagogy. Many of those are what we call evidence-based practices or pedagogies. Many of them are. Goal setting, for example, is incredibly powerful. Vocabulary instruction is incredibly powerful. There is one on there that is not as strong, and that is modality training. That is identifying whether a student is a visual or an auditory or kinesthetic learner and then teaching to that. The research is not strong around that in terms of that being an evidence-based practice, but we are going to come back and talk about that one because in an inclusive pedagogical framework where we give students choice, that area could be very, very important. So thank you for everyone who put down numbers. And I'm hoping that we can come back and talk about some of these as part of our conversation. Thanks, Dr. Lily.
Yeah. Next.
Oh, that's the word. That's the. All right. So what I would like to talk about first is the idea of inclusive education, and maybe next again once we get this next one finished, because it hasn't moved. Right, and one more. So inclusive education is a contentious issue. Everybody seems to think it's really important, and we heard that from the introduction. It's important. I heard in the prayer, for example, I heard a lot of comments that have a very specific, I think, link into the notion of equity and providing everybody the opportunity to be able to be part of their society, to have positive attitudes and positive thinking, and to try and promote that within everyone. So inclusive education is about all. I was introduced as a professor of special and inclusive education, and a lot of people see that as disability. I'm not going to mention disability today, probably again. If I do, it's very rare. I am here to talk about all learners, and I will use the term learners as opposed to students, because I see that as being encompassing of early childhood, schooling, and post-schooling. The lack of clarity of a definition of inclusive education has resulted in some confused states of understanding. For example, many people see it as a focus on disability. It is a focus on all learners, including students with disability. Inclusive education in some context is seen as very much a geographical sort of concept. The student with a disability is in the mainstream classroom. That is inclusive education. And I'm saying to you, it's not inclusive education. It's just placement. Some people are using language, especially from the disability area, especially from the special education area, as language that is inclusive. Again, I think we need to be very careful about how we use that language. And while it is important, we are talking about all learners in the context. So next. UNESCO defined inclusive education some years ago and have reiterated it as part of a report on education globally. Inclusive education promotes inclusive societies, which I think was part of that prayer, where people can live together and diversity is celebrated. Our differences are celebrated. We celebrate our cultural differences, our religious differences, our sporting differences. It's a prerequisite for education in and for democracies based on fairness, justice, and equity. It provides a systematic framework for identifying and dismantling barriers for vulnerable populations according to the principle every learner matters and matters equally. So this definition is talking about fairness, justice, and equity. It's talking about a framework, not a set of actions or behaviours. It's talking about dismantling barriers that prevent people from participating. And I'm going to be asking you questions over the next half an hour about the barriers that some of your learners face in learning context. And I'm going to also ask you to think about these barriers as a difficulty in the student or a difficulty in our educational environment. I am very much going to focus on how we design educational environments that do not pose barriers and exclude our learners. Next. Next slide, is that possible? Right, so inclusive education, I want to conceptualize it in a couple of ways. I want to conceptualize it in terms of attitudes, the way we think. I want to think about it in terms of the environment, the physical environment, and I want to think about it in terms of curriculum. I think it's really interesting that the curriculum division is hosting this professional learning today, and I want to talk about it in terms of instruction. or maybe some people might see that as the pedagogies we use. So let's have a look at some of these. And I think the next slide, right, it looks as though it has some things missing. This is where I would like you to give me some ideas. So what are some barriers or some things that exclude learners in terms of attitudes? The way that we perceive inclusive education, for example, what are some of the attitudinal barriers that maybe exclude or marginalize learners? Can you put it in the chat? Oops. No, we need to go back with that. Thank you. Any attitudinal barriers? One that I often hear is around teachers feel that they don't have the skills and they don't have the knowledge. I've got another set of teachers in mind. I'm thinking, this is not in Malaysia, is around some teachers who believe inclusive pedagogies, for example, are the responsibility of the special education teacher. Cultural barriers, yes, very much so. Religion, yep. They could be barriers, and those barriers come in the form of bias and potentially in discriminatory acceptance, yes. Acceptance in the sense of, do we accept this student into our learning environment? Do we accept a student as accessing the curriculum? Discrimination, definitely. And discrimination here in Australia is something taken very, very, very seriously. Homogeneous, yeah. And I think, Noor, your comment, if I take your comment just a little bit further, is where we tend to pitch everything to the middle, or to the inclusive mean all normal students learning. Yeah, I'm going to challenge the one about all normal students. I'm going to say that inclusive education is for all. So some of the attitudinal barriers are that it is only about those students who are very homogenous in their perceptions. Great. What about environmental barriers? What are some of the things that exclude and marginalize learners in the environment? So we might be talking about physical environment here. Geographically, definitely. There might be social environment, emotional environment, psychological, physical. So some of those go to attitudes as well. Location, yeah. I would also argue that maybe even some classrooms may not be accessible. Stigma, yeah. So that goes to classroom climate. Access, yes, definitely. Right. So that's the physical sorts of environment. Politics and government policy, a good one. I like that one. Cost. And that one potentially goes back into the area of discrimination. Yeah. Culture. Yeah, good one. I like that one, Cheng. Culture of the community. That's why inclusive education, inclusive pedagogies, we need to bring our communities with us. Awareness, exactly. And I would argue awareness is a never-ending process. We're always learning and learning and learning about awareness. All right, great. Organisation of leaders. Ravi, I like that one. To me, leadership is important, and we're going to come back and touch on that in a minute. Great one. What about curriculum? What about in the curriculum? So curriculum division, we're talking about you. So what in the curriculum poses barriers and excludes and potentially marginalizes? And this is a broad definition of curriculum. Exam-based. Can I say to you, as Willow, I think I have the name correct there, that exams in schools can be incredibly exclusionary and pose barriers. Even at university, it poses barriers. We all require the same content at the same pace at the same time, right? Lack of flexibility. Good one. Some excellent ideas here. So how do we make it more flexible? How do we make it so we can address maybe a similar topic, maybe slightly different content? Biased curriculum where education is standardized without considering, right? Let's make without considering all students, all learners, because we might talk about students with disability, but what about those students who have special gifts and talents and are really, really quick at learning things? Make it more fluid, catching syllabus, catchy syllabus. Thanks, City. All right, a last one, instruction. What about instruction? What about the things we do in our learning environments, in our classrooms? How can they be exclusionary? Like me talking in English could be exclusionary. What are some of the things we do to help students learn that could potentially be exclusionary or marginalize students? Well, one that I'm going to put to you a bit later is around the language we use, the words that we use. If we use words that students don't know the meaning of, we can potentially marginalize them, narrowing down the gaps of exclude and mainstream. Yeah, I'm going to put to Mohammed. I'm going to put to you that we need to make it seamless. It needs to be one and the same. It's not one or the other. It needs to be seamless. Absolutely. Yeah. Not consistent. Yeah. Using IT when some can't afford it. Yeah. Gadgets and data. Yeah. It can be excluded. Definitely. We talk about obscure. There could be obscure things that are done or mentioned in classrooms. We have classrooms, for example, this probably goes back to curriculum that might be very noisy, and we've got a group of students who are very sensory defensive and noise is very distracting for them. We have students who may not have the background knowledge that we assume, and if we assume background knowledge, then we can exclude students. So one of the things I'm going to again put to you, where we get into difficulty, where we have environments that can be disabling, is where we don't consider background knowledge and the strengths that our students bring. And that's another key message for you for today. I would really like you to start thinking about the strengths of our students. Instructions may need to be bilingual or trilingual, yes, to include students that may not understand the language. And I would argue that would be far more, certainly the trilingual component would be far more relevant in Malaysia, where you've got local dialects and local languages. But you also you've got English, you've got Malaysian Bahasa, you've got potentially Mandarin and some Indian dialects as well. So, all right. It's great that I have so many responses that tell me about some of the things that marginalize and exclude. And what I'm going to come back to is some of those ideas, but I'm also wanting you to think about the variability in your learners. What are some of the things that vary greatly amongst your learners? Can we go to the next slide? Let's go 2 next, please. 1 and 2. Okay, so promoting, next one, let's promote inclusive education in a whole of context, One more, next. All right, here we go. So these are some attributes of inclusive schools, and I want to stop here for a few minutes because I believe this is really, really important if we are going to get to the end goal of inclusive pedagogies. Because one of the things I've heard people say today, and what I hear teachers say often, is, I don't know. I don't know about inclusive pedagogies. I can't cater for those students. I don't have the background knowledge. So how do we make our schools inclusive and also to be collaborative environments where we learn from each other? So to do this, we need a unified vision of education. We need to be thinking of all. And the minute you start talking about a group, we need to go back to all. How do we have all learners involved? We need administrative and teacher support that improves collaboration, improves shared decision-making, and distributed leadership. We need strong principals. We need strong head teachers. We need strong members of our support staff who are champions of inclusive education. We need our community to become champions of inclusive education. Because as was said by the Ministry of Education executive, inclusive education is good for all. It benefits all. So we need to get to a point of how we make that happen. We need to be a problem-solving organisation. If I'm working in one of your classrooms and I have a group of students who are really, really excelling, they're learning very quickly, they're interested in some very specific topics, I'm just at my wit's end. How do I cater for these students? How do I include these students in my classroom? It could be that I do have a group of students who have some form of, they have multiple languages, so that bilingual, trilingual example. I'm really struggling to accommodate these students. How do I make this happen for me? How do I bring on board some skills and knowledge? So as a problem-solving organisation that embeds data decision-making into daily practice, we resolve these dilemmas that I'm having as a group. We sit down and we talk about it. We share our expertise. We make sure that each of us is feeling comfortable in the work that we're doing and how we're catering for all learners. Multiple modes of instruction to support different learn, maybe that could be one, but I'm going to come back to that one, Mohammed, in a minute. Good, but a very good point. What was really important to me are these high quality instruction in all classrooms. That to me goes to inclusive pedagogies. How do we promote high quality pedagogies in all of our classrooms? And in doing that, we also need to make sure that our teachers, our educators, our support people have adequate learner-centered professional development. And some of the best professional development is done in the classroom. Go back to that problem-solving component. I'm really struggling. I'm reflecting on my teaching. I'm struggling to know how I can accommodate maybe a group of students. I use a learner-centered professional development model to help me. I can do that within the school. I can do that from outside the school. I can do that with discussions with community, discussions with other agencies. There's a lot to think about here, but I cannot stress enough that what's important here is a unified vision. You as a teacher, as an educator, need to feel safe to say, I'm having some troubles here. I'm having a great experience here, and this is what I'm doing to cater for all my students. I need to be safe to be able to say that, to ask those questions, to make those statements, to share my ideas. Very, 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 very much a leadership issue, and us as an inclusive community. Next, please. So what are inclusive pedagogies? So Lani Florian is a wonderful, wonderful educator just recently retired from the University of Edinburgh. And I like her definition of inclusive pedagogy, thinking about learning as a shared activity where a single lesson is a different experience for each participant. encourages a shift in thinking away from teaching approaches that work for most alongside something additional and different for some. The classic example here is designing for the, as I've heard saw a phrase here, the normal students or the typical student, catering to the, planning to the, or designing to the typical student, and then thinking about, okay, David needs, is somebody who struggles with some of this. How do I cater for that? So I want us to move away from that, and I want us to move to an idea that one that involves providing rich learning and opportunities that are sufficiently made for everyone, all students, so that all learners are able to participate. And can I say to you, a key word there is participate. The idea that all students will learn the same thing at the same time in the same way is something that we really need to move away from if we want to be inclusive. We want our students to be participating in learning. We want them to be able to demonstrate their learning at different levels in different ways. Very, very important. So an inclusive pedagogy provides rich learning opportunities for all, and making sure that all of our learners are able to participate and learn. Not the same thing, not at the same pace, but they have the opportunity to learn. And in doing that, we need to give them voice. We need to give our learners opportunity to talk about where they would like to move in terms of their learning. Goal setting, as it's known. Before I move on, though, I will make one, I suppose, exception here. There are a small number of students who may need something very specific. I'm not disputing that. I don't want to get into that tonight, but I will admit there are a small group of students who may need something quite specific, quite unique, and quite different. Student with a vision impairment, for example, may need Braille, but that is very, very specific. There are many things that you can do, though, that can be inclusive of that learner. There may be a student who requires personal care and with assistance with personal care. That can be done as well, but it doesn't have to separate them from all of the learning activities. Okay, can we go to the next, please? So inclusive pedagogies must include a belief by teachers that they are aware that their choices in the way that they design a lesson, so the decisions you make, the decision I make, the decisions we make, and the actions we take in organising learning, conveying messages and values, reach well beyond the formal focus of the lesson. We need to take into consideration that how we design a learning environment can include or it could exclude. And what I'm really in wanting to talk about is how we include all learners. I want to talk about how we remove barriers and move exclusionary forces. So some of the choices we make include designing activities in the classroom, selecting and sequencing learning items and concepts and ideas. If I break something down into small steps, that could be far more inclusive than breaking it down into big steps, where students don't see the link from one step to the next step. They like missteps. I want to know how we assess students' learning. Somebody mentioned exams. They are very, very exclusionary because it is one form. In Australia, for example, we teach in one way and we test in another way. That is not very inclusive. How we arrange our learning environments can be incredibly important. Some of the work I've done in Indonesia, for example, I think the learning environments there, the teachers there say that they're not very well resourced and they're not very modern. But for me, They are incredibly flexible. I can move desks, shift desks, put them outside, open up spaces. I can put desks together so students are learning together. There are lots and lots of opportunities in those situations. And the last one is our attitudes. If we believe that we can't cater for all students, then there are students who we will not cater for. We need to believe that we can do it, but we don't have to do it by ourselves, and we don't have to do it in isolation from other people in our environment. So collaboration, leadership, and a unified vision is really important. Lack of understanding yes, while I agree with you, and one of them for me is moving away from this idea that inclusive education is about students with disabilities. It's not. It's about all learners. All right, let's move on to the next one, please. So, how do we build these inclusive structures? This is a graphic taken from the work of a lady by the name of Katie Novak, and I acknowledge it's from one of her sites. But it talks it has a school building. So that's our school. It has in there 3 tiers. I am going to be talking about tier 1 today, because tier 1 is critically important. Somebody said to me earlier today in a conversation that many people see tier 2, for example, if a student is receiving that additional support, that's all they have to worry about. Tier 2 and tier 3 depend on tier 1. Depend on tier 1. I was at a meeting only yesterday at the university. I co-chair our Disability Inclusion Action Plan Implementation Committee at the university, and we were talking about inclusive education and inclusive pedagogies. And one of the things that we reiterated is that we need to make our pedagogies inclusive. We need to make our curriculum inclusive so we can minimize the number of students who may be excluded. There are a group of students who, to include them, may need some additional support, and that is tier 2 and tier 3. But our work at tier 1 should be addressing the barriers that those students face, the issues that they face. So tier 1 is really important. It's wrapped in this concept of universal design for learning, which I'll come back to in a minute. Can I just have a next, please? Because I'm going to talk about, I'm going to just want to highlight, oops, no, it's not on that one. So in that graphic, there are two things that I would like to just reiterate or to focus on. One is leadership. Strong leadership is very important. I go back to qualities of inclusive schools. Unified vision, strong leadership, very important. We need leadership who firmly believe in the ideals of inclusive education, that all learners can be included, all learners are learners, and all learners will learn, and that all of our teachers and all of our support staff have the capacity to do that. Another one is competency drivers. This goes to ensuring our teachers are the strongest they can be. You can train as a teacher, but teacher training does not equip you for every eventuality. Nothing will. But if we have mechanisms in place that support us to address those unique situations that we face, then we have a much stronger capacity in being inclusive. Very, very important. Next, please. One more, please. So, designing inclusive pedagogies. Here are some assumptions. Student learning is an interaction of the individual, of the learner, with the environment or the context in which they're in. You could put me in a classroom in Malaysia, and if the lesson was in Bahasa, I would be disabled because I don't have the background knowledge. So my strengths the environment that I'm in are not a match. They don't interact. They're apart. So that dynamic interaction of the individual with the environment is very, very important. If a student is being excluded, we need to shift the environment so they can be included. We need to change that interaction, the dynamic interaction. Next, please. Learner ability and disability is at the intersection of that. And that's what I think I've just been saying. I can disable someone by the language I use. I can enable someone by making sure that they have the language to use. I can disable someone when I'm not clear on what it is I want them to learn. I can enable someone by making sure that I have clear goals, flexible goals that provide multiple opportunities and multiple variations in how they show their learning. Very important. Going to come back to that one again. Next. Learners in any environment represent a range of variability. So I have a question for you. What are some of the things, or how do some of your things, what are some of the things your learners vary on? What is some of the variability that you find frustrating potentially in your teaching? I'm going to give you an example from here at my university. Oh, sorry. I have a hand raised. Somebody wanted to ask a question? Punisa?
Yeah, Miss or Mrs. Punita, did you raise your hand just now?
That's right. That's right. We'll
Yeah,
come
I think she accidentally. Yeah.
Thank you for raising your hand, though. So I'll give you an example. I'm working with a group of colleagues at the university at the moment. I'm trying to enhance the inclusivity of one of my classes. And one of the barriers that I face, one of the things that the variability that I face in my students is I have a group of students. I like that one, the language ability, but I have a group of students who will come to class prepared. I have another group of students, a very large group of students, who don't come prepared. They haven't done their readings. They haven't listened to the lecture. They haven't, for example, I give them a pre-exercise of this is some language that you need to know about. Make sure you write it down. All of those sorts of things. Make sure you do some investigation. So one of the things I've been trying to do is how do I enthuse students, engage and heighten their engagement in doing the readings for my class. Now I can do it through motivation. I like that one, Noor, the motivation and purpose of the learning subject. Exactly. I can heighten the motivation. One of the ways I can do that is to have an assessment that is based on the reading. So I give them a quiz. I've just done that for the last few weeks. It's interesting. I also gave some quiz that weren't accessible, and they got very, very agitated, quite anxious about that. So yeah, motivating them. Another way is, sorry, that's a very external motivation, but I also want them to become internally motivated to do that. So purpose of the learning subject. And Noor, we're going to come back and talk about that one. Not teachers, but the policymakers. Okay. Proficiency, yeah, proficiency in English, proficiency in the language in which has been taken. I would argue in a classroom, some of the variability that you would possibly face are things like attention, students attending, having them constantly, actively and interested. Yes, I think that's important. Attending, being ready, being prepared, I can think of students in your classroom who might be very good at reading material, so they can read material very quickly and very effortlessly. They can understand it. You've got a group of students who really struggle with that. So how do I challenge both of those groups of students? How do I go about making sure that my pedagogy includes all of them? Because the class is not about reading, it's about science, or it might be around history, something in those areas. Another one is that I've got a group of students who really don't like writing. So how do I come up with a way that students can show their learning, but don't necessarily have to write it? Writing can be a barrier. Can they talk about it? Can they draw it? Can they work with somebody else? Can they make a choice of, this is an example of a closed circuit in electricity. This is not an example. I can write about closed circuits and circuits in electricity. I can draw them. I can take photos. I can talk about them. I can predict. I can make choice. All sorts of things in there. But how do I design a learning environment that ensures that all students with a range of variability, can be included? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So if we accept that there is variability in our classroom, the next point is very important. And can I say to you, there was a comment earlier about curriculum and being inflexible. Can I have the next please? I think we missed one, did we? No, there we go. So if we design our instruction for the average learner, for the middle, if we think about them as a homogeneous group of learners, we're designing for no one. And the presentation that I have on my machine would then show you, for example, if I were to take everyone, the 290 plus people on this presentation, and I was to weigh you, take your height, your shoe size, your hand length, a whole range of things about you, the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, all of that sort of thing, you would all vary. But somewhere in there, somebody would say, this is the average person. But no one's average, because no one is that person. So what a guy by the name of Todd Rose says, ban the average. Ban the average. Yeah, readiness by all in the classroom. But remember, readiness by all puts it back on the student. I'm trying to say to you here, we need to be ready ourselves to address all learners, the variability in the classroom. I hear educators say the child is not ready to go to school. The child shouldn't have to be ready to go to school. The school should be ready to accept variability. And I see that as really, really important. Next, please. Oh, there it is there. I did put it in. So you can see there, you can see it in terms of body image, but you can also see it. The one on the right is I think very much the subconstructs in an intelligence score. So you've got things like similarities, vocab, knowledge, block design. I can teach students block design and they'll do very well on that. These are all skills that some people have learned and other people haven't learned. But the notion of average is never possible, because nobody is ever on all of those constructs in the middle. You vary in some way. It's like a fingerprint. So what we want to do is ban the average and design to the margins. We need to know our students and design to the margins. We need to design pedagogies and curriculum to the margins, so it addresses variability in our learners. Okay, next. So here's an example, and there's going to be a test in a minute, so be wary. So this is a matrix a barrier matrix that a lady by the name of Barbara Meyer put together, and her colleague Rossi. I'm happy to send Dr. Lilly the paper for people who want to have access to it. But one of the things that I hear teachers say is, and especially those of you in upper elementary and into middle school and into secondary school, you say, but the students can't read the material. They don't have the skills to read the material. Or if they do have the skills, they're very slow, or they have trouble. Yeah. So what happens is that the variability is in the learner in terms of their decoding skills, in their being able to look at the text and interpret it, to be able to say, this is what this word is and this is what this word is. They don't know the meanings of words is another thing that they vary on. And that becomes a barrier if we don't take that variability into consideration. So I've identified accessing reading content is something that my learners vary on. They come to me with a range of strengths. Let's talk about strengths, not what they can't do. Decoding text is one aspect. Knowing the meanings of words is another. If I asked you more, you could give me more. So what's a strategy? What's a strategy that helps us get over the decoding of texts? Well, don't give everyone a textbook. Have available a textbook, have an audio file, design a peer reading scheme, have audio-visual representations of the text, have differing levels of difficulty of the text. There are many, many things that you can do on a computer, for example, to be able to read text. A standard computer with Adobe Acrobat or Adobe Reader on it will allow you to read most texts in PDF form. So what I'm thinking about here is I'm going to give my students choice. I'm going to say to them, this is the material in differing modes of representation, and it's your choice. It goes back to, I like that, Rafi, accepting the capabilities and limitations of our students, but I would be focusing on capabilities, the strengths. So I'm going to give choice to my students. Now, we talked about modality training, the idea that we have auditory learners and visual learners and kinesthetic learners, all of that sort of thing. I'm not going to go down that pathway because we know from the research it's not a very robust way to go. But I can give my learners choice and they make a decision on how they would like to access text. So everybody gets the same opportunity. You don't have to, for example, say, you're a student with a disability, so you must do it this way. I give all my learners choice. I can have students who learn things really, 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 really quickly, and they might pick up an audio file. I can have a student who may struggle, but he's going to use a textbook and read it with his partner, peer reading. So I've now created an environment where my students are either together or as a group being able to work through this text. I can do it in the classroom. I can do it across curriculum areas. I can do it out in the playground. I can do it anywhere. In terms of word meanings, I'm going to come back and talk about this one in a minute because I'm a great fan of word meanings and vocabulary, and it's an incredibly powerful barrier. It marginalizes students very quickly. So I'm going to come back and say, all right, we don't need to think about the individual here. We're going to talk about this as a whole school plan, and we're going to get at an inclusive pedagogy going at the whole school level. Another one is around understanding, actually comprehending what we do in our classrooms. There's a notion called big ideas, and big ideas will go to the cognitive side of learning, where we help students organize learning. I can think of some young people who will learn material very quickly. They pick it up and they run with it. Another group of students, though, may have difficulty in learning the material because they might not have the background knowledge. So if I don't give them the background knowledge, they're going to be disabled. Or they might have the background knowledge, but they don't realize that they can use that knowledge to build this new knowledge on, and they're not clear on how they build that knowledge. So these are what we call big ideas. Reading has a number of big ideas. Science has a number of big ideas. Mathematics has a number of big ideas. History has a range of big ideas that you can use. So it's about teaching things smart, teaching them carefully to students so they acquire them. So it's around organizing and using key concepts, ideas, and processes. In cognitive psychology, if you can do that well, you tend to have good memory because you can recall. You tend to be able to learn because you can recall. But if you're learning things individually and don't have those links between common constructs, then you forget because the demands cognitively are too much. The load cognitively is too much. So I'm going to help my students in terms of their cognitive capacity. I'm going to help them with cognitive load, and I'm going to help them learn and remember things. I can do that by breaking tasks down into small steps, showing the connectedness between concepts and ideas visually, a graphic organizer. I can scaffold the learning. I can use common language. When we do this maths problem, this is where we start. We start here. This is the first step. This is the next step. I keep the language consistent because next I want them to do, what do you do first? What do you do next? Let's do it together. Next one, together. I am scaffolding that through. I can get my other students to help in that way. So how we sequence that is important. How we give students practice in those skills is incredibly important. Many of the students who we say have difficulties because we don't give them enough practice, and we don't schedule practice often enough and frequently enough over a period of time which is long enough for them to acquire. We tend to teach things in a week and then we move on. Got to have learned it in a week. No. Think of things that you've had difficulty maintaining or learning. You learn them because they keep on coming back to you. All right, next. All right, attending. This is one that I hear teachers say all the time, attending during class. So let's make class exciting. I heard somebody up here had put that down before. Make it motivational. So listening and active engagement with learning. If I'm not interested, I switch off. If you're not interested in what I'm saying, you'll switch off. One of the problems with doing this online is I can't see you. I can't monitor your face. I can't monitor your mood. I can't see what you're doing. It's a big barrier for me in terms of keeping you engaged. So I want to heighten motivation. I want to have multiple and short sessions, for example. Some years ago, we were teaching students in mathematics about three-dimensional shapes. And what they usually did in this school is they had a lesson a week. We teach a lesson on shapes, and next week we come back and do it again. And the next week we come back and do it again. And what we said to the teacher was, no. Let's try something different. Let's teach it 3 times a week for 20 minutes instead of for an hour. So we distributed it across and we made it really interactive. We got the kids actively involved. We gave them the language. We gave them plenty of practice. We slowed down the pace a little bit to make sure they got the key concepts. And all of our learners got the key concepts. They represented it and demonstrated it in different ways. They talked about it, they drew it, they wrote about it, they took and modeled it with different materials. They looked at it in their community. Lots of ways for them to be able to do it. So just by changing up the way that we sequenced the material, the way that we organized the resources, and the way that we timetabled the learning became incredibly important. I like that. I'm going to make a mess of this. PASA. Routine for many students, and many adults, by the way, is really important. Giving students predictability in their environment can be very, very important. So how do you make routine in a classroom? How do you support that for all learners? Can somebody, a little bit of problem solving here? How do I get routine in the classroom and make sure that it's always accessible for everyone? You can tell them, this is what we do first, this is what we do next, this is what we do next. Today we're going to do morning circle, then we're going to, yeah. So you can reward them. I'm going to go before rewarding them. And reward doesn't, by the way, have to be concrete. It can just be a recognition. Everything, everywhere, all at once. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure on that one. Example, repeated and consistent instructions. Yes, examples. Rules. Yeah, you can have rules. And when the student doesn't meet a rule, you say, okay, what happened here? We didn't quite do what we expected. What was the rule? What was the rule that we were thinking about? So see how you're not punishing necessarily. You're constructively correcting by getting the student to tell you the rule. What was the rule? How did we go? Did you meet it? Get them to make those judgments. Another one is to make sure that you've got it. Yes, you're consistent. Have it verbally. Have it in pictorial form. Have it in words. Give students multiple ways for them to remember. Remember the routine? It's on the wall. What do we do first? What do we do next? What do we do after we do that? Great. So I'm not becoming the person who's always correcting. I turn this back on the student. What did we agree to? We do first. Where are you at? So I'm continually including the student in making these decisions. Multiple activity and a group, yeah. Consistency, reward when saying correctly. Yeah, but we also want to get to a point where students do it, because that's the way our community works. That's the way our classroom works. And when our classroom works, hey, it's enjoyable for everyone. So we don't have to always be rewarding in that sense. Picture exchange communication could be another one. That's for quite a specific group of students, yeah. What do you want to achieve for students from the specific aspect of your context, general knowledge context? Not quite sure what that means, Faza. Repetition. Repetition is needed, yeah. Again, it can be differential. All right. Can somebody give me from your classroom something on which there's variability, something that maybe it could potentially be something that frustrates you? What's a student variability that really challenges you? No? Oh, so I know to remember the very next day what has been taught. Okay, not trying at all. Okay, so the first one about unable to remember. So that goes, yeah, no response. No response. That's one. I think Dr. Lily is telling me something. Focus, the need, high demand. Okay, diversity level. Okay, so diversity of learners. All right, so let's go for the one number of students. Okay, all right. gives up easily, lack of motivation. So we get this lack of motivation bit. So all right, students vary in their motivation for learning. So that's the variability. So how do we define variability, motivation? I think I can't see all the things, lack of attention maybe, lack of interest, not wanting to complete a task, all of those things come into it. So what are some strategies? What are some strategies for heightening motivation? Now, somebody's already said reward. That's potentially one. Appreciation of the student. I'm assuming that is Nazira. A repetition higher. Cannot get support from admin and other teachers. Okay, that's what I call an externalizing one. I want to be able to do this in my class, simulation, role play and activity. So maybe the activities that we're getting. So maybe the activities we're getting students to do are not, well, I've got their simulation, but maybe stimulating enough. We want our activities to be really exciting for our students. So what's one way to determine what might be exciting for students? How would you establish that? If I ask this question here in Sydney, in New South Wales, I would expect my teachers to come back with teaching standard number 1. And that one is know your students, know what interests them, know what motivates them. I ask them. I will talk to the students and say, what is it that's going to, that you think we should be doing here? How can we play is really important, especially for younger students. Setting up play so students have the opportunity, or children have the opportunity to engage in a range of pair and group discussions, role play, fun learning, making it relevant to them. I want to give you an example then. I only heard this one yesterday from a very, very good colleague of mine. He is a principal of a secondary boys' school. Highly diverse cultural background in the school, lots and lots of problems over the years with student behaviour, and he has been brought in specifically because one of his expertise is addressing student behaviour. And one of the things he determined fairly early on was that students were not interested. They were not motivated to be in part of it. So he has a curriculum to teach. He has to teach English, and he has to teach mathematics and science, and he has to teach histories and languages and physical education. So what he did is he sat down and he listened to his students. What were you interested in? What is something that you really, really want to do? What do you want to do when you finish school? And yesterday he was talking about how many of the students wanted to know how to run a business. They said, when I leave school, I want to know how to get a job. I want to know how to run my business, all of those sorts of things. So he set up this school of business in his school where students with keen interest in business could join classes. And in those classes, they taught maths, they taught English or language, they taught science, and they taught all of those curriculum areas, but it was all based around business. How do we develop a business? What is the business you want to get going? So student had choice. They had choice in what the businesses they wanted to operate on. The outcome of that has been incredibly powerful. His students are engaged. Poor behavior has dropped to the extent that they now have community organizations who would like those high school students to join them to be part of their business. So the students are now getting active experience in how to run a business in the real world. And what the classroom teachers are doing is connecting that experience back into the classroom, making it relevant to the students. They're still doing history, they're still doing maths, They're still doing English, but they're trying to connect it into those interests of the students. Now, some people will say, but they won't be able to do the end of year test. Well, a good thing here in New South Wales is we don't typically have an end of year test, an exam. So that's one good thing. The other thing is that the test should not be the ultimate goal. The test should be student learning. It should be about engagement, and it should be how do we equip our students to leave school to be active and productive members of our community. So we can get some blended learning, creative, meaningful learning that is relevant. I like that one, that wording of that, really good. Yeah, running a business, like that, PASA, really good. SWOT, yep, Noor, you're talking about, strengths and those sorts of things, and needs analysis, exactly, and working with different groups. All right, let's move on. Can I go to the next one, please? Okay, so how do we do some of these? How do we do some of this at a whole school level? I think we've got competition. All right, I'm going to go through this very, 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 very quickly. This is another example. I am working with some teachers from a school. One of the things that they were really concerned about is how do we become inclusive? Because inclusive is not about saying necessarily what is it that every student in my class has to learn. I want to design learning environments for everyone. I want to design to the margins. So let's design to the margins. And this is an example around how a whole school designed to the margins, where everybody contributed and everybody participated. And by everybody doing it, it lowered the workload. It strengthened the learning in a very, very, very simple way. So there's a big idea in here, which is around language is really important to learning, and knowing the meaning of words is really, really powerful. So this is around vocabulary. Can I go to the next slide, please? And Dr. Lily, I'll finish in about 10 minutes. So vocabulary, the meaning of words, it can be a barrier and it can be an enabler. And this school was having all sorts of difficulties because students were coming to class and they were having trouble with the language. So it's about knowing the meanings of words. It's highly correlated with academic, social, and emotional well-being. Most vocabulary that you and I have learned is through reading. If you don't read, it's very difficult to get a large corpus of words that you understand. So teaching vocabulary can be really, really powerful. Next, please. So what this school did is they set at a whole school level, unified vision, leadership, problem solving, and making sure that they used their resources carefully. They came up with a plan that everybody would teach vocabulary that was relevant to their class on that day in that subject area. The special education teachers and the shadow teachers and the other specialist teachers all contributed by helping class teachers. They gave them specialists. They might have given them specialist ideas. They might have, some of the teaching assistants or shadow teachers, for example, developed different resources so that teachers had them to use. And what they did is they agreed that for the first 5 minutes of every class, every teacher would teach vocabulary. And it was done as a revision. It was done as a pre-teaching exercise. Let's give the students the knowledge they need to be able to participate in the next lesson or the lesson after. Or let's review the words that we did a week ago or 2 weeks ago. There are lots and lots of things that you can do in that realm. They also looked at vocabulary in a couple of ways. One was there are everyday words, right? Words that we need every day. But there are also academic words, words that are, you know, for learning, is part of the learning language. And then there might be domain-specific words. So these are words that you might have in history, you might have in science. They might be specific to something you're reading in language or in mathematics or in a music or a creative arts sort of environment. So they're specific specialist words, ones that you may not use outside of that classroom. And they may have said, these are the words that my students need to know. All students need to know. And know means they can tell you the meaning, they can show you the meaning, they can see it in the environment, they can use it in their language. There are lots and lots of ways that students can demonstrate knowing the meanings of words. And that can be differentiated according to the needs of the student, the skills and the strengths that a student brings. I've got a group of students who I would expect multiple examples of knowing the meanings of words. I've got another group of students who may have a slightly different way of demonstrating. I can think of students who have quite complex educational needs, and they're just going to identify the meaning of the word. This is an example of convection. This is an example of a quadrilateral. This is an example of, I don't know, Malaysian independence. Something along those lines, where it's just purely an identification skill or a discrimination skill. I go from complex multimedia sorts of ways down to discrimination responses from students who may have quite complex needs. So vocabulary is really important. Can we go to the next one, please? That's just a way that you can do it. So word knowledge, you can think about the breadth, depth, and fluency. You can look at word structures. You can look at how you assess it, and you can look at the instruction. Incidental, explicit, constructed, within context, outside of context, across content areas. Lots and lots of ways that you can look at the meanings of words. If you've got word meanings that get used across different content areas, know how they link. Show students the sameness. Show them how they link. So they're not learning this in science, this in maths, and this in English. They can see the same word, know the different meanings, and link them together. All right. Normally we don't teach what students like or prefer to learn, but curriculum. Yeah, but the way you organize that curriculum can be in a way that students will like and prefer to learn. That's the whole game here. If you interpret curriculum very, very rigidly and only do it in a written form, or only do it in a talking form, or only represent it as a text, then you exclude students. So I'm encouraging you to think about, this is the curriculum outcome we're working towards. How do I make it more flexible? All right, let's go to the next one. I'm very conscious of the time. I'm going to go over that one. Let's click to the next. So here is a lens to help you, to guide you. Next, please. So inclusive design. Many of you will see in your environment differing ways that environments are designed. In this picture here, for example, we've got a set of stairs where they have ramps embedded within them. So a student in this, a person in a wheelchair, for example, in this environment can go from the top to the bottom and bottom to the top. Person who walks can do that. The person who's pushing a pram, me with my new granddaughter, my granddaughters. So I can push the pram with my two granddaughters up to the top or down to the bottom. It's universally accessible. I can do the same in learning. Next, just one more press. So we can have this in the area of learning. Let's think about, how do we design inclusive environments that accommodate all learners? Can I go to the next one, please? So this is the Universal Design for Learning framework. It is a framework. It's not a pedagogy and it's not a practice. It's a framework. I need to make a couple of announcements here. First of all, there is a really good website, cast.org, cast.org, which will give you a whole lot of resources in this area. Next one is, there's lots of information on there. You do not have to do it all. I can pick one of those things, one of my favorite ones around vocabulary. It's right in the middle of that diagram that you can't read, but it's right in the middle of it, making sure that my students know vocabulary and symbols. I want them to make sure that they know it so they doesn't become a barrier for them. There are 3, I think one more click will get me an arrow. Right. One more click. Next. No. All right, leave it there, leave it there. Universal design is a framework that guides the shift from designing learning environments and lessons with potential barriers to designing barrier-free, instructionally rich learning environments and lessons for all students. All students, all learners. It's not a disability thing. It's not a gifted and talented thing. It is an all thing. And I originally saw this as a set of pedagogies. It's not that. It's a framework. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking that I can design and implement a lesson that can address the needs of all learners. But I need to design it first. I need to be proactive in the way I do it. So I need to interpret curriculum flexibly. I need to know my learners. I need to be creative about the resources that I have, because I can hear people saying, I don't have the resources, I don't have the resources. Be creative in what a resource looks like. It doesn't have to be a computer. It can be environmental resources. Next, can I go to the next one, please? Right, very, very quickly. So next, one more press, I think. Right, so we have 3 principles: engagement, multiple means of engagement. This is to do with motivation, attention, all of those sorts of things. We want our students to be self-regulated, self-motivating, intrinsically wanting to be part of learning. Multiple means of representation is the purple. It's about making sure that our students have experiences or have opportunities to make choice about how materials are represented to them. Is it in an audio form? Is it in a visual form? Is it in a multimedia form? What sort of opportunities can I offer to students? It can be motivational. So it has a link back into that engagement thing. But I want them to become expert learners. So I want them to go to the bottom part of that purple stage, where they start to understand how knowledge is connected, how I can put materials together and think things through and become a problem-solving person. And the last one is around all action and expression, making sure that I give students plenty of opportunities to demonstrate their learning in a variety of ways in which they choose or can choose or have the opportunity or are scaffolded to choose. I want them to be goal setting. I want them to say, in this lesson, this is what I want to achieve, or in this part, I want to achieve X and Y. So they goal set, and then they self-regulate as part of that. So now again, we get these parts interacting. So within each representation or principle, we get what we call guidelines. Next, just press one more. So these are the guidelines. There are 9 of them. This is around recruiting interest. This is very external in the way that we go about it. It's about giving rewards. I want my students to be internalizing. Then within each guideline, we have a set of what we call checkpoints. Next, please. And so within each area, there's a checkpoint. And there are 32 checkpoints. You do not have to do them all. It will depend on your learners, and it depends on what the variability it is that you're trying to address. What is a potential barrier that variability might throw up if I don't consider to the margins? And the last part of this is, next, is that we have this down the side. So the top of the arrow, the top of that figure is very externalized. It's where I have a lot of input, but I want my students to be self-regulating, goal-setting, expert learners, and that's down at the arrow, the pointy part. That's where I want my students to be. Your students are going to be across the whole framework, and you'll need to think about a range of things upon which to be inclusive of all. Okay, next, I think we're nearly to the end. So, universal design for learning provides a lens to critically examine the design of learning, to enhance its richness and remove potential barriers, to be inclusive, to design inclusive pedagogies. So at the very beginning, I asked you whether peer tutoring was an inclusive pedagogy. It can be. It can be an inclusive pedagogy. It allows students to learn together. It can be a barrier, though. If I've got a student who is quite reluctant to work with another person, it can potentially be a barrier. So what we do is we give peer tutoring as a choice. I also had goal setting in there. That is an inclusive pedagogy, but students will be at different stages of developing goals. You might need to give some students a lot of scaffolding while other students can do it independently. Universal design for learning is in many ways a mindset. All learners can learn, and I, as the teacher, can design learning experiences for all my learners. But you work in a community, you work within a school, really important, a problem-solving school that has common aims and flexible resourcing. Universal design for learning is one lens for designing inclusive pedagogies that addresses learner variability. Lani Florian has an inclusive pedagogies framework as well. There are two that you can access, but they are lenses, they are frameworks, they are suggestions. But your mindset is critically important in all of this. Thank you, and terima kasih.
Thank you, Prof. David, for the insightful presentation. So you have highlighted so many points, many points, important points. I can remember the whole school approach, and of course, lastly, UDR. We have a few questions actually in the Q&A form that we have shared earlier. So some of the questions are quite similar, redundant. So I'm going to choose a few. Okay, may I read some of the questions?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. So some are in Malay, some in English. Okay. There are questions about how can the stakeholders of I think he meant the MOE or stakeholders of organization do their part in welcoming inclusive classroom in Malaysia education systems. And for these questions, it's related to I think how do we handle the negative stigma about inclusive school as well? So perhaps you can actually just digest these two questions and explain to us about welcoming inclusive classroom in Malaysia education system, and how are we going to avoid the negative stigma about inclusive schools. And what happened here, another similar question is how are we going to empower inclusive education? Yeah, I think that's three related questions that you can please respond.
Oh dear.
Yeah, answer first.
Just ask all the hard questions.
Yeah.
So if I put an inclusive pedagogy sort of hat on or framework in my head, I think each of those three questions have an element of attitudinal barriers within communities. And there are many stakeholders. There are teachers, there are students, who can have that can be barriers. And then you've got community, I think, which is another really important one. Developing inclusive educational or positive inclusive educational environments is not it cannot be done overnight, and I would hazard a guess you probably couldn't do it in a year. It's a journey. And I think I can think of the example that I heard yesterday, the principal who was brought into that school purposefully to sort out a very, very disorganized and uninclusive school. I think it's taken him 6 years to get where he's got to. So but he has brought his teachers along on the journey. He has empowered his teachers. He has brought his community along, and that means engaging with community groups, engaging with parents. And in doing that, he has modeled to his students about acceptance of difference. Now, is it a perfect environment? No, it's not a perfect environment. But it's much, much stronger than it used to be, because it was a very fractured environment where inclusivity was not being practiced in any form. Lots of discrimination against students on the basis of disability, on the basis of religious background, on the basis of culture, gender. No, it wasn't gender because they're all boys. So it was culture, religion, and disability were the three big ones. So this requires a whole of school vision. It requires a strong principal, a strong leadership team, but it also requires everybody to have a voice in it. And it means teachers, it means the support workers, it means the students, and also the community. You are going to get people who are going to be resistant, unfortunately, to it, or they have a very biased view about what inclusive education is. I would start small. I would go for the biggest returns on the minimum energy. Work with those people who want to do it and convert those people who are not as eager and not as motivated. That would be some of my thing. But start small, just small to go with it. But it's a continual professional learning activity for me.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Prof. I think that your response or your explanation has also answered these questions about how to make school admin understand the importance of inclusive, and also,
Because
that's the questions.
Because
Okay.
inclusive education is anybody, any student can be excluded at any point. And what we're trying to do is represent to everyone that this doesn't have to be the case. When it happens, we need to know about it, but we do it respectfully.
Yeah.
And we talk about it, and we try to work out how do we build environments that make sure everybody has a voice, everybody has a part to play, and everybody has a chance to learn.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. I think that's answered this question as well. Another question is, he says, bagaimana menarik minat murid inklusif untuk belajar dan tidak rasa rendah diri. If I may translate, she actually asks you, how are we going to attract the people that have been included? So that's happened in Malaysia. Inclusive students to learn and does not feel inferior. With that questions, I actually would like to ask you this question. I think you can actually explain it for both of the questions that I'm going to voice. The question is, it seems that our audience still perhaps I would say a bit confused or misinterpreted between these terms: inclusive education, inclusive practice, inclusive pedagogy, which are often used interchangeably. Am I right?
Yes.
Prof?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the literature review and even in our own practice.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
See? So shall I start again?
No, I
The terms,
missed a few
yeah.
words.
Okay, so these three terms are used interchangeably. So how are we going to differentiate the terms so that the terms inclusive students in inclusive classroom, I would say that it's not used like
Yeah.
how
Okay.
should I say that? Because it's not that inclusive education or inclusive pedagogy. So how are we going to differentiate these three terms?
So the three terms are inclusive pedagogy, inclusive
Yeah.
students, and inclusive
No.
classroom.
Inclusive education, I would say inclusive practice, inclusive pedagogy.
So inclusive practice, inclusive pedagogy,
Inclusive education.
inclusive education. Okay. Well, I'm my response, my I suppose rather, I don't know, blank response to that is inclusive practice, inclusive pedagogies, and inclusive education is about all. It's not a disability thing. It's about
Yeah.
all. And and can I say, especially I know in Indonesia, for example, and I think in Malaysia and some other countries in Southeast Asia, the concept of inclusive education is very, very, very much linked to students with disabilities. Whereas in a more contemporary view, it is, and can I say Australia's not a lot different these days, but inclusive education is about all students. That's how we should be seeing it, because we all are different. We all vary in some way. And this is about giving everybody a voice, everybody a chance to learn, everybody to participate. So I would be working away at the language that we're talking. When we're talking about inclusive education, we're talking about all. And I would be changing the wording of the conversation to say, okay, we're talking about all students here. That's how I would be approaching that. But from my experiences in Indonesia, for example, it's a really tough one because it's so entrenched in the language. All are interrelated to each other. All are interrelated to each other, but it's also all about all.
Yeah.
Everybody is a teacher of inclusive education.
Yeah.
Yep. No one left. I like that one. I can't say that name. I'm very, very sorry. But including everyone in everything, no one was left behind in all situations, especially, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Prof. Another questions, may I? Okay, before that, perhaps my colleagues have actually shared our feedback forms. Please
Yes.
fill up the forms. We will share your SPL KPN link at the end of the session. Please be patient. Okay. Thank you. Okay. There's questions. It's related questions: how to help shy students, how to improve inclusive education in rural schools. Okay, perhaps we could discuss about this, Prof. How to improve inclusive education in rural schools?
Okay. I think my most favorite example of inclusive education is from a rural school in Indonesia. And one of the reasons it is, I find it such an exciting example and such a great example, is they didn't let anything get in their way. And they said, and you know, when I hear teachers say, but I don't have the resources, or I don't have this, or I don't have that, they said, no, we are going to be inclusive. It was a mindset. This is how we're going to do it. And they had there was one particular teacher, Mr. Benny, he was just a champion, and he supported his staff and he supported his colleagues and he demonstrated it, and they really opened up. They really opened up their ideas around the curriculum. They opened up their ideas about what would be seen as pedagogy. It's not sitting at the desk writing. It could be sitting at the desk writing. It could be sitting on the floor writing. It could be sitting on, painting or talking about it or anything. They used materials from around the community to support their learning because the kids were familiar with it. They knew what it was, and they worked with their community. And the students who were identified with disability, the typical inclusion students, became students. They became part of the community. It was a smallish school, but it was not a highly resourced school by any imaginations. Now, one of the really good things about this example is that they learnt from another school. So they actually worked with a school that was being very inclusive and was implementing the Universal Design for Learning framework as their inclusive framework. And they worked with that school and they mentored each other. So their professional learning, they were sharing their professional learning and their ideas. And those, we talk about communities of learners. This was such a great example of how that came forward. So rural schools, I don't see any real difference from any other school. It's just a different context. The principles are the same.
Yeah. Thank you, Prof. Are we able to answer one last question?
Sure.
Yeah, because we began at 2:35, so we may stop by 4:35, right? Okay, thank you, Prof. One last question. I think we have tried as educators, as teachers in the classroom or in the lectures, we have tried to include everybody in our teaching and learning activities.
Yep.
But most of the times, we perhaps do not realize, rather than or instead of including certain pupils, we exclude them. Yeah. So how do we ensure this relationship between inclusion and exclusion remain positive as we intend to do?
Okay.
Yeah.
Great question. A great question. And can I say to you that is very, very relevant for students with disabilities, where we think we're doing something that is very inclusive, but it's actually excluding the students. So when I heard that question, the first word that came into my head was voice. We need to give our students voice. We need to hear them. We need to give them an opportunity to have a voice. And we need to ask them about whether they feel part of the classroom or not. Is what I'm doing, is it helping? Or you don't have to say, is it excluding? But it's getting feedback from the students. Being reflective on what you do is really important. But give students voice is really important. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Thank you so much for the response, for the discussion. I think that's all. Or do we have anybody who would like to raise questions verbally?
Oh,
you may switch on your mic on your video. Anybody?
There's a big text
Because
message.
I have been reading the questions from the Google Forms that we have shared earlier. So my friends would please, my colleagues, could you please share the link for our SPL KPM registration? Thank you so much.
Can I
do
make
we have anyone?
Can I make one comment?
Yeah,
There's a very long text message there. But thank you very much to that person.
Yeah.
This is not about having a separate program for every student.
Yeah.
This is not the aim of this. It's about designing instructionally rich learning environments of which all students can access and participate and learn.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we see people, oh, I've got 45 students in my class, I've got to have 45 programs. No. It's about designing rich environments, but then also making sure that we are attentive to every student in the classroom. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Prof. Okay, okay, one more round, one call. Anybody, do you have any questions? We have a minute to go. Yeah. No more questions. Uh, from our very own MOE, I think. So I don't think so.
Hi there, good evening.
Yes,
Hi
Miss
there, good
Monica.
evening. I'm sorry, actually, I don't have a question,
Okay.
but I would like to say thank you very much to Professor Evans for the lovely
Okay.
sharing. It was awesome. Hope to see you again. Hope next time you will have a face-to-face conference maybe
Okay.
with
Yeah.
all the special education teachers. Where the
Okay.
understanding will be better. Good evening. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Good evening,
Terima
Miss
kasih.
Monica. Terima kasih. Thank you so much. Okay, I think that would be all. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have found this session informative and useful. Let's digest, adopt, and perhaps adapt the knowledge and improve ourselves to be more inclusive in providing and supporting all students. So our PLC session about inclusive pedagogies is coming to an end. We would like to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you for making this event a great success. Our heartfelt thanks to our our director, Dr. Rusmini, who are not able to join us today, Deputy Director, all sectors, and our very own Deputy Director, Encik Muhammad Shafi'i, and not forgetting the committee who had worked for this program to be a success. I have no words for you, Prof. Just our heartfelt appreciation, and personally, it is a blessing to have you presenting today. Just an email and WhatsApp messages, and then you agree to be with us today. Yeah, you're taking your very important ample time to join us today. So thank you so much. Thank you for your
Thank you,
valuable
Dr. Lily.
contribution.
All right.
Thank you so much again. So my colleagues here has shared our SPL KPM link. Do fill up, do register your attendance. Okay, shall we all have our photography session? Could you please open your video before we leave this session? I can see a few faces already. Thank you so much. We have our Deputy Director, Cik Shafi'i. I can see that. Cik Her, our committee member. Yeah, please do. Okay, we would have a few snaps, a few print screenshots. Muka tak mandi, malu. Okay je. Mandi nanti. Okay. More coming because there's few faces that I can't see on my own screen. Okay. Ready? My friends would help me actually. Thank you so much. Okay, 1, 2, 3 shots. Okay, another screen perhaps. If you would like to take a print screen as well, do. Okay, 1, 2, 3 shots. Shall we do this? Thumbs up. Whatever you want to do. Heart like this or whatever. Okay, 1, 2, 3 shots. Okay, last one. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very
I
much.
think that would be all. Let's
Thank you, thank you.
finish up.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you
would
so much.
say,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Very
Thank
much.
you.
Okay,
Thank you,
Wadaya.
Thank you, Prof.
Wassalamualaikum
Thank you very
warahmatullahi
much. Thank you.
wabarakatuh.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good
Selamat
afternoon and God bless
berpuasa
everyone.
esok.
Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you.
Ya, Ramadan Karim.
Thank you.
Selamat berpuasa.
Selamat berpuasa.
Ya, sama berpuasa for Muslim.
Yeah, thank you so much. And do join us later. Soon, we have another speaker, actually, Professor Richard Rose from University of Northampton, UK, United Kingdom. So do look out for our next session, our next sharing.
Okay.
Thank you.